A millionaire saw a girl taking a rotten pizza out of the garbage, followed her, and couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. On the bustling streets of San Francisco, where the aroma of sourdough bread mingled with the scent of the bay, Edward Blackwell walked with purposeful strides. At 55, this pharmaceutical industry magnate had it all: considerable wealth, respect in business circles, and a reputation as a philanthropist that had earned him the affection of many. However, something was missing in his life, a piece of the puzzle that he couldn't quite fit. That October afternoon, as he headed to a business meeting, something caught his attention. In an alley near Union Square, a girl no more than 7 years old was rummaging through a dumpster. Her tangled blonde hair fell over a dirty but angelic face. In her hand, she clutched a moldy piece of pizza as if it were treasure. Edward stopped in his tracks. The image hit him like a punch to the gut, stirring memories of his own humble childhood in the poor neighborhoods of Detroit. Without a second thought, he approached the little girl. "Hello, sweetheart. What's your name?" he asked softly. The girl looked at him warily, clutching the pizza to her chest. "Lucy," she murmured after a moment. "Lucy, are you hungry? Would you like me to buy you something to eat?" Edward offered, pointing to a nearby sandwich shop. Lucy's eyes lit up for an instant, but then the shadow of fear darkened them. "I can't. My brother Max is sick. I have to bring him food." Edward's heart clenched. "Where's your brother, Lucy? Can I help you both?" After a moment of hesitation, Lucy nodded and led Edward through a maze of alleys to a run-down building. In a corner of what was once a commercial space, on a tattered mattress, lay a boy of about 10. His pale, sweaty face showed evidence of the fever that ailed him. Edward wasted no time. He called his driver, and within minutes, he, Lucy, and Max were on their way to the best private hospital in San Francisco. As the car moved through the city streets, Edward couldn't stop looking at the children. There was something in their features, in the shape of their eyes, that seemed strangely familiar. At the hospital, while doctors attended to Max, Edward gently questioned Lucy. He discovered that the children were orphans. Their mother had died a year ago, and since then they had been living on the streets, taking care of each other. "And your dad?" Edward asked. Lucy shrugged. "Mom said he was an important man, but he couldn't be with us. We never met him." A chill ran down Edward's spine. His mind traveled back 12 years, to a fleeting romance with a young waitress in a small town in Oregon. They had spent only a few weeks together before he returned to the city, immersed in the maelstrom of business. He never knew she had become pregnant. As they waited for news about Max, Edward made a decision that would change the course of many lives. He couldn't ignore the possibility that these children were his, but even if they weren't, he wouldn't abandon them to their fate. "Lucy," he said in a firm but warm voice, "would you and your brother like to live with me? I have a big house where you'd be safe and comfortable. You could go to school and have everything you need." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You won't separate us?" "Never," Edward promised, feeling that for the first time in a long time, his life had a clear purpose. That night, as Max recovered in a private hospital room, Edward made calls, pulled strings, and set in motion the process to become the children's legal guardian. He didn't know what the future held, but he was determined to give them the home and love they deserved. What Edward couldn't imagine was that this act of kindness would not only change Lucy and Max's lives, but would also trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of his world and reveal long-buried secrets. Years passed like water through fingers. Lucy and Max, now 17 and 20 respectively, had become bright and compassionate young adults under Edward's care. The Blackwell mansion in the hills of San Francisco, once cold and lonely, now brimmed with life and laughter. Lucy, with her golden hair and hazel eyes, was the very image of determination. An outstanding student, she divided her time between volunteering at local hospitals and her passion for biotechnology. Max, for his part, had become a tall, athletic young man with a sharp mind for business that reminded Edward of himself in his youth. Edward watched his adopted children with a mixture of pride and a persistent feeling of déjà vu. Each passing day, the similarities between them and himself became more evident. The way Max furrowed his brow when concentrating, identical to his own. Lucy's melodious laugh, so similar to that of her mother. One spring afternoon, as the family enjoyed a meal in the garden overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, Edward made a decision. It was time to seek the truth. "Kids," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "there's something important I need to tell you." Lucy and Max exchanged worried glances. They had rarely seen their adoptive father so nervous. "Since I met you, I've felt a special connection," Edward continued. "At first, I thought it was just the desire to protect you and give you a home. But over time, I've noticed things. Similarities I can't ignore. What do you mean, Dad? Max asked, leaning forward. Edward took a deep breath. I believe it's possible that I'm your biological father. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucy dropped her fork, which resonated against the porcelain plate. Max sat open-mouthed, unable to articulate a word. But, how? Lucy managed to say after a moment. Edward then told him about Sarah, the young waitress he had met years ago. He spoke of the brief but intense romance, and how circumstances had separated them. I never knew Sarah was pregnant, Edward concluded, tears in his eyes. If I had known. Max, always the most pragmatic, was the first to react. We need to do a DNA test, he said firmly. To be sure. Lucy, for her part, remained silent, processing the information. Finally, she looked up, her eyes bright with contained emotion. All this time, you've been our real father? Edward nodded, unable to speak. In an instant, Lucy threw herself into his arms, quickly followed by Max. The three melted into an embrace, tears mixing with laughter of disbelief and joy. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. The DNA test confirmed what their hearts already knew. Edward was, without a doubt, the biological father of Lucy and Max. The news shook not only the Blackwell family but all of San Francisco's high society. Local newspaper headlines spoke of nothing else. Pharmaceutical magnate discovers his adopted children are his biological heirs. For Lucy and Max, the confirmation brought a mix of emotions. On one hand, the joy of knowing that the man who had rescued and loved them for years was really their father. On the other, a renewed pain for the mother they had lost and who had never revealed the truth. Edward, for his part, immersed himself in deep reflection on fate and second chances. How was it possible that life had led him to find his children in such a fortuitous way? Guilt for the lost years mixed with immense gratitude for the opportunity to remedy his involuntary absence. One night, as the family dined in silence, each lost in their thoughts, Lucy spoke. I think we should do something, she said with determination. Something to honor Mom's memory and to help other kids who are in the situation Max and I were in. Max nodded enthusiastically. You're right, Lucy. We could create a foundation. Use the family's resources to make a real difference. Edward looked at them with pride. It's a wonderful idea. What do you have in mind? Thus was born the Blackwell Foundation, dedicated to providing homes, education, and medical care to homeless children throughout the United States. Lucy, with her volunteering experience and knowledge in biotechnology, focused on developing innovative health programs. Max, for his part, took charge of management and finances, ensuring that every dollar was used in the most efficient way possible. Edward, seeing the commitment and passion of his children, decided to take a step back in the direction of his pharmaceutical company to dedicate more time to the foundation. Together, the Blackwells embarked on a mission that not only united them even more as a family, but also began to transform the lives of thousands of children across the country. However, as the Blackwell Foundation grew and gained recognition, shadows from the past began to silently approach. In the power circles of Washington, D.C., Edward's old rivals watched with suspicion the family's rise in the philanthropic scene. Long-buried secrets threatened to come to light, endangering everything the Blackwells had built. What Edward, Lucy, and Max didn't know was that their family saga was just beginning. The bonds that united them would be tested in ways they never could have imagined, in a battle that would not only define their future but that of thousands of people who depended on them. The Miami sun fell relentlessly on the tarmac as the Blackwell family's private jet landed. Edward, now 65, descended the stairs with a slow but firm step, closely followed by Lucy and Max. They had come to inaugurate a new Blackwell Foundation clinic, a project that promised to revolutionize medical care in the region. However, the joy of the moment was overshadowed by concern. Edward had been experiencing chest pains in recent weeks, something he had tried to hide from his children. But nothing escaped Lucy's watchful eye. Dad, are you sure you're feeling all right? She asked as they walked towards the waiting limousine. Edward forced a smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a bit tired from the trip. Max, always observant, noticed the exchange. Maybe we should stop by the hospital before going to the hotel, just to make sure. Before Edward could protest, a sharp pain shot through his chest. He staggered, clutching Max's arm. I think you're right, he gasped. The next few hours were a whirlwind of sirens, hospital corridors, and medical terms. The diagnosis came like a blow. Edward had suffered a heart attack. He needed immediate surgery. As they prepared Edward for the operation, Lucy and Max clung to each other in the waiting room. The fear of losing their father, just a few years after discovering the true relationship, was overwhelming. "We can't lose him, Max," Lucy whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "Not now." Max hugged her tightly. "We won't. Dad's strong. He'll pull through this." The operation lasted hours that seemed like an eternity. When the surgeon finally came out, his expression was grave. "We've stabilized Mr. Blackwell," he informed them, "but his condition is delicate. He'll need specialized treatment that, unfortunately, we can't provide here in Miami." Lucy, determination shining in her eyes, took control. "Where can we get that treatment?" "There's a clinic in Houston," the doctor replied. "They're conducting clinical trials with a new cardiac regeneration therapy. It's experimental, but it has shown promising results in cases like Mr. Blackwell's." Max wasted no time. With one call, the family jet was ready to depart for Houston as soon as Edward was stable enough to travel. Lucy, meanwhile, immersed herself in research, contacting the world's best cardiologists for second opinions. 3 days later, the Blackwell family landed in Houston. The journey had been tense, with Edward connected to medical equipment and under constant supervision. Despite his weakness, he tried to keep his children's spirits up. "Look on the bright side," he joked weakly as they transferred him to the clinic. "We'll finally have the Texas barbecue I always promised you." Lucy and Max exchanged looks of concern mixed with admiration for their father's strength. The following months were an emotional rollercoaster. The experimental treatment was intense and exhausting. Edward spent hours connected to machines that seemed straight out of a science fiction movie, while his children took turns being by his side, reading him news from home and keeping him updated on the Foundation's progress. Slowly, Edward began to show signs of improvement. His color returned, his strength increased, and the doctors spoke with increasing optimism about his recovery. However, as Edward's health improved, a storm was brewing back home. The patriarch's prolonged absence had sparked rumors and speculation in business and social circles. One afternoon, as Max was checking the news on his tablet, a headline caught his attention: "Scandal in the pharmaceutical industry. Is the Blackwell empire built on lies?" Heart-racing, Max read the article. An investigative journalist had unearthed documents suggesting that, years ago, Edward had used questionable tactics to eliminate competition and secure government contracts. The article insinuated bribes, manipulated clinical trials, and a network of influence that extended to the highest levels of government. Max was stunned. Could it be true? The man described in the article bore no resemblance to the loving and philanthropic father he knew, but the evidence presented was hard to ignore. With trembling hands, Max called Lucy, who was in the hospital cafeteria. "Lucy, we have a problem," he said as soon as she answered. "A big problem." As Lucy read the article, her mind raced. If these accusations were true, or even if they weren't but people believed them, everything they had worked for was in danger. The family's reputation, the foundation, the legacy they were building. It could all crumble. "We can't tell Dad," Lucy decided. "Not in his condition. We have to handle this ourselves." Max nodded, though he knew his sister couldn't see him. "But how?" "This is bigger than us, Lucy." "Maybe," she replied, with a determination that Max recognized as the same he had seen so many times in his father's eyes. "But we're Blackwells. We don't give up without a fight." And so began a battle on 2 fronts. While Edward fought for his life in Houston, unaware of the storm that was unleashing, Lucy and Max embarked on a mission to save the family legacy. Max flew back home to face the crisis head-on. He met with lawyers, gave interviews defending his father's name, and worked tirelessly to keep the Blackwell companies afloat. Lucy, for her part, divided her time between caring for her father and coordinating a parallel investigation. She was determined to get to the bottom of the matter, to uncover the truth behind the accusations. As she dug deeper, Lucy discovered that the reality was more complex than it seemed. Yes, her father had made questionable decisions in the past, but the full picture revealed a man trapped in a corrupt system, struggling to survive and, ultimately, using his success to do good. Meanwhile, back home, Max faced an avalanche of criticism and accusations. Former business partners distanced themselves, politicians who had once been friends now called for investigations, and the media seemed intent on crucifying the Blackwells. One night, exhausted and on the verge of despair, Max received a call from Lucy. "I've got it, Max," she said, her voice vibrating with excitement. "I have evidence that shows Dad was more victim than perpetrator. And more importantly, I have a plan." As Lucy outlined her idea, Max felt hope being reborn. It was risky, bold, and would require them to put everything on the line. But if it worked, It would not only save their family's reputation but could change the course of the pharmaceutical industry in America forever. Are you sure about this, Lucy? Max asked when she finished speaking. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Lucy responded, her voice was filled with unwavering determination. It's the right thing to do, Max. It's what Dad would do. As the Blackwell siblings prepared for the fight of their lives, in a hospital room in Houston, Edward opened his eyes, feeling stronger than he had in years. He didn't know he was about to face the most difficult test of his life, one that would challenge not only his physical strength but also the strength of the family bonds he had forged. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the presidential suite at the Four Seasons Hotel in New York City. Max Blackwell adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, his reflection returning a look of determination mixed with anxiety. In a few hours, he would face a room full of journalists, businesspeople, and government officials. It was the day the Blackwells would fight back. Across the country, in Houston, Lucy paced back and forth in the hospital room, mentally reviewing the plan over and over again. Edward, sitting on the bed, watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. "Lucy, sweetheart," he said softly. "Are you sure you want to do this? I can fight my own battles." Lucy stopped and looked at her father fiercely. Lucy stopped and looked at her father fiercely. "This is our battle, Dad. Yours, mine, and Max's. We're a family, remember?" Edward nodded, feeling a wave of emotion. How much his children had grown, how strong they had become. "Then let's do it," he said with a smile. Back in New York, the hotel's conference room buzzed with activity. Journalists from across the country, and even some international ones, settled into their seats. The air was charged with expectation. What would the Blackwells have to say in the face of the accusations that had shaken the nation? At 10 a.m. sharp, Max entered the room. The murmur of conversations instantly died down. With steady steps, he approached the podium. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice clear and confident. "Thank you for your presence here today. As you know, in recent weeks, our family and our companies have been the subject of very serious accusations. We're here today to address these accusations head-on and with full transparency." Max paused, his eyes scanning the room. "But before we get into details, I'd like you to hear from someone else." With a gesture, he signaled the technicians to turn on the giant screen behind him. Edward Blackwell's face appeared, broadcasting live from Houston. Lucy was by his side. A murmur of surprise ran through the room. It was the first time Edward had been seen since the news of his illness had become public. "Good afternoon," Edward began, his voice weaker than many remembered, but still carrying authority. "First, I want to thank everyone for their concern during my convalescence. I'm improving day by day, thanks to innovative treatment and the love of my family." Edward paused, his expression turning serious. "But I'm not here to talk about my health. I'm here to talk about the truth. The truth about our past, about the mistakes I made, and about the future we want to build." For the next hour, Edward spoke with brutal honesty. He admitted that in the early days of his company, he had made questionable deals. He talked about the pressure to survive in a corrupt system, about the difficult decisions he had to make. "I'm not here to justify my actions," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm here to take responsibility for them." Then, Lucy took the floor. With scientific precision, she presented documents, emails, and recordings that painted a complete picture of the situation. Yes, Edward had made mistakes, but he had also been a victim of a system larger than himself. More importantly, Lucy revealed how, in recent years, Edward had worked tirelessly to correct those mistakes. She presented evidence of how Blackwell Company's profits had been reinvested in ethical research, in programs to provide access to medicines for marginalized communities, in the foundation that bore their name. Back in New York, Max took over. He announced a series of radical measures. The company would open its books to an independent audit, implement new transparency protocols, and work with the government to reform pharmaceutical industry practices. "But we won't stop there," Max declared, his voice resonating with passion. "Today we announce the launch of Project Phoenix." On the screen behind him appeared the logo of a phoenix rising from the flames. Lucy took the word to explain. Project Phoenix is a global initiative that will use Blackwell Company's resources and expertise to revolutionize access to healthcare in marginalized communities around the world. But it goes beyond that. It's a commitment to educate and train these communities in the ethical and sustainable use of new medical technologies. Max continued, "We want to create a new paradigm in the pharmaceutical industry. One where profit and social responsibility are not mutually exclusive, but reinforce each other." The room was silent, absorbed. The journalists, who had arrived expecting a desperate defense, found themselves faced with something completely unexpected, an admission of guilt followed by a bold plan for redemption. Edward took the floor one last time. I know these words and promises may seem hollow after what you've heard. That's why, today, I'm putting everything I have on the line. If we fail to meet Project Phoenix's goals in the next 5 years, I commit to donating 90% of my personal fortune to independent charities. A murmur of amazement ran through the room. It was a huge bet, a commitment that no other magnate had dared to make. I'm not asking you to forgive us today, Edward concluded. I'm asking you to give us the chance to prove, with actions, that the Blackwell name can be synonymous not only with business success, but with positive change in the world. When the press conference ended, the room exploded into a cacophony of voices. Journalists shouted questions, photographers fired their cameras. Amidst the chaos, Max remained firm at the podium, calmly and precisely answering questions. In Houston, Edward leaned back in his hospital bed, exhausted but with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Lucy hugged him, tears of relief and determination in her eyes. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. Edward smiled, squeezing his daughter's hand. "No, sweetheart. We're just getting started." Meanwhile, in government offices, corporate boardrooms, and homes across America, people heatedly discussed what they had just witnessed. Was this the end of the Blackwell empire? Or the beginning of something new and revolutionary? What no one could deny was that the Blackwells had changed the game. They had taken a scandal that could have destroyed any other family and transformed it into an opportunity for real change. But the road ahead would not be easy. The Blackwells had made bold promises, and now they would have to fulfill them under the relentless scrutiny of the public and the media. The real test was just beginning. The months following the historic press conference were a whirlwind of activity for the Blackwell family. Max immersed himself fully in restructuring the family businesses, implementing new transparency and ethics protocols that would soon become the gold standard for the industry. Sleepless nights and endless days of meetings became the norm, but the determination in his eyes never wavered. Lucy, for her part, led the launch of Project Phoenix. With the same passion and precision she had shown in the investigation that saved her family's name, she now dedicated herself to revolutionizing access to healthcare in marginalized communities. Her first target, the Appalachian region, one of the poorest areas in the United States. On a crisp autumn morning, Lucy landed at a small airport in West Virginia. By her side was a team of doctors, engineers, and educators, all committed to Project Phoenix's mission. "Welcome, Drive Blackwell," greeted Sarah Johnson, a local community leader. "I can't express how much it means to us that you're here." Lucy smiled, shaking Sarah's hand. "The honor is ours. We're here to work alongside you, not to impose solutions." Over the next few weeks, Lucy and her team worked tirelessly. They established a mobile clinic equipped with the latest medical technology, trained local staff in its use, and started health education programs in schools and community centers. But the real challenge came when they faced deep-rooted distrust towards Big Pharma. Many in the community saw Project Phoenix as just another attempt by corporations to exploit the poor. One afternoon, during a community meeting, a man stood up, his voice laden with bitterness. "Why should we trust you? Big companies always come, make promises, and then abandon us." Lucy didn't flinch. Calmly, she stood up and looked the man in the eye. "You're right to distrust," she said. "We're not here to ask you to trust us blindly. We're here to earn that trust with actions, not words." Then, to everyone's surprise, Lucy began to tell the story of her own childhood. She spoke of the days when she and Max lived on the streets, of how fate had led them to Edward, and of how that second chance had inspired them to create Project Phoenix. "We're not here as saviors," she concluded. "We're here as partners, because we believe that every person, regardless of where they were born, deserves the opportunity for a healthy and dignified life." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of applause. Slowly, the community began to open up, to actively participate in Project Phoenix's programs. Meanwhile, in New York City, Max faced his own challenges. The implementation of new transparency policies had brought to light questionable practices in some of the company's subsidiaries. Max didn't hesitate to take drastic measures, even if it meant sacrificing short-term profits. Mr. Blackwell, one of the oldest executives, warned him, these measures could cost the company millions. The shareholders won't be happy. Max looked at him steadily. "I'd rather lose millions now than lose our integrity forever," he replied. "Besides, this isn't just about us. It's about changing an entire industry." As the months passed, results began to become evident. In Appalachia, infant mortality rates began to decline. access to medicines and treatments that were previously unattainable improved dramatically. And most importantly, the community began to take the reins of their own health, with prevention programs led by local residents trained by Project Phoenix. On the corporate front, Max's transparency actions, though initially costly, began to bear fruit. Investor confidence was gradually restored, and other companies in the sector began to follow the Blackwells' example, implementing their own ethical reforms. Edward, meanwhile, recovered in New York. Although he was no longer at the forefront of daily operations, his experience and advice remained invaluable. He spent hours each day on video calls with Lucy and Max, offering guidance and encouragement. One day, while reviewing Project Phoenix reports, Edward couldn't hold back tears. "My children," he murmured to himself, "they're doing it. They're really doing it." Project Phoenix soon expanded beyond Appalachia. In less than 2 years, they had established similar programs in the Mississippi Delta, Native American reservations, and other areas with high marginalization rates. Each new project was adapted to local needs and cultures, always with the same principle: empowering communities to be protagonists of their own health development. Internationally, the Blackwell model began to attract attention. Lucy was invited to give talks at the WHO and prestigious universities. Max became a reference in business ethics, consulted by governments and corporations alike. But perhaps the most emotional moment came 3 years after the launch of Project Phoenix. Edward, now recovered, visited along with Lucy and Max the first community where they had started in West Virginia. They were received as heroes, but what moved them most was seeing how the community had flourished. The clinic they had established was now entirely run by local staff. Young people who had been trained by the project were now studying medicine and nursing at the best universities in the country. Sarah Johnson, the community leader who had received Lucy that first day, hugged them with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just give us healthcare," she said. "You gave us hope and the ability to forge our own future." That night, as the Blackwell family dined in a small local restaurant, Edward looked at his children with infinite pride. "When I found you so many years ago," he said, his voice laden with emotion, "I thought I was saving you. But the truth is, you saved me. And now, together, we're helping to save others." Lucy and Max took their father's hands. No words were necessary. The three knew that, no matter what challenges the future might bring, they would face them together as the family they were. Project Phoenix, born from adversity and nurtured by the love and determination of a family, had become a beacon of hope. And its light would continue to shine, illuminating the path towards a more just and healthy future for all. 5 years had passed since that fateful press conference that had changed the course of the Blackwell family and the pharmaceutical industry in America. The afternoon sun bathed the terrace of the Blackwell mansion in the Hamptons, where Edward, Lucy, and Max gathered for a family dinner. Edward, now 70, watched his children with pride. Lucy, at 27, had become an internationally recognized leader in the field of public health. Max, at 30, was considered a visionary in the world of ethical business. Both had grown beyond his most optimistic expectations. So, Edward began, pouring wine into the glasses. "Tomorrow's the big day." Lucy nodded, a mix of nervousness and excitement on her face. 5 years. Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday when we started all this. Max smiled. And other times it feels like decades have passed. They've been the most intense 5 years of my life. Of our lives, Edward corrected. And I'm prouder of you than words can express. The big day they referred to was the presentation of Project Phoenix's results to an international commission of experts. It was the moment of truth, the culmination of 5 years of tireless work and the fulfillment of the promise they had made to the world. The next morning, the United Nations headquarters in New York buzzed with activity. Journalists from around the world, pharmaceutical industry leaders, politicians, and activists gathered to witness what many considered a historic moment. Lucy, dressed in a navy blue suit that highlighted her professional demeanor, took the stage. By her side, Max, with his characteristic lucky red tie. Edward, seated in the front row, gave them an encouraging nod. "Good afternoon, everyone," Lucy began, her voice clear and confident. 5 years ago, we stood before you in a moment of crisis. We made bold promises and asked for a chance to prove that change was possible. Today, we're here to give you an account. For the next 2 hours, Lucy and Max presented a detailed report of Project Phoenix's achievements. The numbers were impressive. 40% reduction in infant mortality in areas where the project operated. Access to essential medicines multiplied by 5 in marginalized communities. Over 10,000 local health professionals trained in new medical technologies. implementation of prevention programs that had reduced the incidence of chronic diseases by 25%. But beyond the statistics, it was the individual stories that really captured the audience's attention. Max shared the testimony of a young woman from Appalachia who, thanks to the training received through Project Phoenix, was now studying medicine at Johns Hopkins. Lucy spoke of entire communities that had gone from being passive recipients of aid to being active managers of their own health. But our work is far from over, Max declared. Project Phoenix was never conceived as a quick fix, but as the beginning of systemic change. Lucy took the floor. Today, we're not just presenting results. We're launching the next phase of Project Phoenix. On the screen behind him appeared a world map. Points of light began to illuminate in different countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Over the next 5 years, Lucy continued, we will expand Project Phoenix to 20 more countries. But this time, we won't do it alone. Max explained, we have formed a coalition with other pharmaceutical companies, NGOs, and governments. The model we developed in the United States will be adapted and replicated in different cultural and geographical contexts. The presentation concluded with an announcement that left the audience speechless. Edward joined his children on stage. 5 years ago, he said, his voice charged with emotion, I promised to donate 90% of my fortune if we didn't meet our goals. Today, I can proudly say that we have surpassed those goals, but that doesn't mean we're going to keep that fortune. Lucy continued. Today, the Blackwell family announces the creation of the Global Phoenix Foundation. We are donating 95% of our family fortune to fund health and development initiatives around the world. The announcement was met with a standing ovation. Journalists pounced on their phones, eager to be the first to report the news. In the front row, several CEOs of other pharmaceutical companies looked at each other, aware that the Blackwells had just raised the bar for corporate responsibility to an unprecedented level. As the Blackwell family embraced on stage, tears of joy in their eyes, the world was witnessing more than the culmination of a successful project. They were witnessing the birth of a new paradigm at the intersection of business and social good. That night, back at the Blackwell mansion, the family gathered in Edward's study. The patriarch pulled an old photograph from his desk. In it, a younger Edward was seen holding 2 small and dirty children, Lucy and Max, the day he found them. Look how far we've come, he said, passing the photograph to his children. Lucy took it, her fingers tracing the contours of their younger selves. It's incredible to think about everything that's happened since then, Max nodded. And to think it all started with an act of kindness. A man who decided to help 2 kids on the street. Edward smiled, his eyes bright with pride and love. No, my children. It all started when you taught me the true meaning of family and purpose. The 3 melted into a hug, aware that their journey was far from over. Project Phoenix had grown beyond their most ambitious dreams, becoming a global movement, but for the Blackwell family, it would always be a reminder of how love, determination, and faith in human potential could change the world. As night fell over the Hamptons, the Blackwell family contemplated the future with hope and determination. They knew there would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, but they also knew that, together, there was nothing they couldn't achieve. The legacy they were building wasn't measured in dollars or stocks, but in transformed lives and empowered communities. It was a legacy of hope, of positive change, and of the unshakable belief in the power of good. As they prepared for bed, each reflected on the path they had traveled and the one that still lay ahead. Lucy, in her room, mentally reviewed the plans for the global expansion of Project Phoenix. She knew that each country, each community, would present unique challenges, but she also knew that the methodology they had developed in the United States was adaptable and resilient. With a smile, she thought of the thousands of Lucys and Maxes who could have a chance thanks to their work. Max, sitting on the edge of his bed, reflected on how the business world had changed in the last 5 years. Ethical practices and social responsibility were no longer just buzzwords, but imperatives for long-term success. He thought of the young entrepreneurs who contacted him daily, eager to learn how they could grow their businesses ethically and sustainably. He promised himself that he would continue to be a mentor and an example for the next generation of business leaders. Edward, in his study, looked out the window at the lights of the distant New York skyline. He remembered the ambitious young man he once was, obsessed with success and profits. How different his definition of success was now. He thought of the children he had seen in Project Phoenix clinics, of the mothers who now had access to prenatal care, of the elderly who could live their last years with dignity. This was his true legacy, and he couldn't be prouder. The next morning, the family breakfast was full of renewed energy. Plans were discussed, ideas were shared, and the future was shaped at that table. You know, Edward said as he spread jam on his toast. "I was thinking last night about how all this began. With a little girl holding a piece of moldy pizza." Lucy laughed. "What a way to start a family saga, huh?" Max nodded, a smile on his face. "And look where we are now. Who would have thought that moment would change not just our lives, but those of millions of people?" "It's a reminder," Edward said seriously, "that every act of kindness, no matter how small it seems, can have a huge impact. We never know how our actions might change the world." Lucy raised her coffee cup. "To the small acts of kindness that change the world," she toasted. "And to family," Max added, "that gives us the strength to carry 'em out." "To family," Edward repeated, his voice full of emotion, "and to the future we'll build together." As their cups met in the air, the three knew this was just the beginning. Project Phoenix would continue to grow, evolve, adapt to new challenges. The Global Phoenix Foundation would be a beacon of hope for millions. And the Blackwell family, united by bonds stronger than blood, would continue to be the heart of it all. In the years to come, they would face new obstacles. There would be moments of doubt, of exhaustion, even of despair. But they would always have this: the love that united them, the determination that drove them, and the certainty that together they could overcome any adversity. And so, as the sun rose over the Hamptons, illuminating a new day full of possibilities, the saga of the Blackwells continued. A story of redemption, of second chances, of family, and of the unshakable belief in the power of good to transform the world. Because in the end, isn't that what we all seek? A purpose greater than ourselves, the opportunity to leave the world a little better than we found it, and the love of a family to support us every step of the way. For Edward, Lucy, and Max Blackwell, that dream had become a reality. And with every life they touched, with every community they transformed, that dream expanded, grew, multiplied.